Hello YouTube, it's Ryan here with Hobbies and Man once again, and today we're going to be doing another manga review. Today we're going to be looking at Dragon Ball. We're going to be looking at the first arc. So I was going to do the first saga, which is the first 54 chapters, but once I finished reading, I felt like, once I finished reading the first arc, I felt like there was a very clear and easy stopping point, and I didn't want to remove that from the story, so I decided that let's finish the first arc and let's talk about it, and then I'll move on to the second arc, and that'll be part 2 of this first Pilaf saga, I think is what it's called. So this first arc is something along the lines of like Emperor Pilaf or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is, but basically it's defined by the bad guy, which is Pilaf, but it's not really about him. So yeah, the author of Dragon Ball is, of course, Akira Toriyama. Famous man. Very great mangaka. A bit on the pervy side, though, and I had not really remembered that until now. So, yeah, the publisher is obviously this. It's a Shonen Jump title, and it's been in print for like 20 years at this point. I don't know. It's been a long time. And when you're reading the first set of the story, you can definitely tell that it's a very kind of old school. It almost feels a little bit like outdated in the translation, the way that the characters talk to each other, but it might have been correct at the time period. I don't know. I feel like it might be time to re-edit the series and try to figure out a new version, or maybe not an abridged version, because I don't think that's the right terminology, but a new translation that is more more with the times that are current, because it just feels pretty old. So yeah, the demographic is obviously shonen if it's on the Shonen Jump app, the Shonen Jump magazine. And the genres here are adventure, martial arts, and sci-fantasy. Now, for those of you that don't know, sci-fantasy is basically more or less a fantasy story with science fiction elements, like very, hyper advanced technology. And that is basically what we get in this story. So it's set up in what you could call kind of modern times Earth, but the technology is very different and very modern, and not even modern, just like very highly developed, way more into the future. But then there's still a bunch of fantasy elements, like there's dragons, there's dinosaurs, there's talking animals. There's a lot of mix and match. The most perfect example of something like this would be Star Wars, where yes, it happens in space, yes, there's technology, but the technology doesn't really matter. It's just window dressing for the mainline fantasy story, which is space samurai in the case of Star Wars, right? In this case, it's martial artists that happen to be aliens, right? So it is what it is. And yeah, in terms of adaptations, of course, this has several. It has video game adaptations. I used to have one for the Game Boy. It has anime, movies. It has all sorts of stuff for it. So yeah. The premise is basically that we get introduced to Bulma, who's looking for the Dragon Balls, and she stumbles across Goku one day, and then they go on a bunch of little adventures to find the rest of the Dragon Balls, while at the same time meeting a bunch of different characters along the way. And some of them happen to be villains, some of them happen to be good people, but overall, it's just a gathering of funky little characters. So yeah, the plotline is pretty simple. It's pretty light and fluffy and generally easygoing. However, there is a lot of points in the story that are a lot pervier than you could probably find in modern Dragon Ball. And I think this is because Akira Toriyama's Dr. Slump is apparently a lot more adult-oriented than most people think. And this came after Dr. Slump. And so there's a lot more adult humor than you could probably expect from something so beloved and well-known as Dragon Ball. And I think that's because it started off as a comedy, and then it evolved into the martial arts action manga that we know of today, right? So it's going to be a little bit jarring if you're starting off, based on your knowledge of Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball Z Kai. So be aware of that. It even caught me off a little bit off guard, even though I had a lot of extensive time with this series specifically, but most of that time was a long time ago, and so a lot of it was stuff that I vaguely remembered but didn't really know exactly. So it kind of hit me that there was a lot more perviness to it than is expected from Dragon Ball, in the kind of current zeitgeist, right? So yeah, she goes around, she meets Goku, And then they battle some monsters. They battle a pterodon and a dinosaur and a giant gorilla and a giant pigman, I think. And then they meet Roshi, who happens to be a perv. There's that infamous scene where Bulma flashes in her private bits, and then they meet Ulan, who is a teenage boy apparently, but he's a pig, and he's just trying to find a girlfriend. But every girl that he finds ends up being way too much for him to handle. So, yeah, eventually they go into a desert. They meet Yamcha. They battle with him, and we get to see the Wolf Fang Fist, the coolest move in the galaxy, even though Yamcha is kind of a dumbass. And, of course, Goku beats him, and eventually Yamcha decides that he's going to have a secret plan, which is to chase them and then eventually take advantage of the Dragon Balls. And everyone has petty wishes, so it's kind of funny. Eventually, they come across the Ox King, and of course, we get introduced to Chi-Chi, Goku's future wife. Then we get to fight the Rabbit Mob, and this is when you remember that Akira Toriyama just likes to have funky-ass characters. And then finally, we get introduced to Pilaf, who actually comes out of nowhere, steals all the Dragon Balls, and then summons Shenron, which looks badass, by the way. And then we get the reveal that Goku has werewolf powers and he turns into a giant ape when he looks at the moon. And that actually ends up being an important plot point. And then it transitions into the end of the story, which is really odd because it's like so well encapsulated that you could just like finish the story there and you don't really have to read anything else. And it's done. You can move on. But, if you want to get to the good stuff, you have to get to the next section of the story. So, yeah, it's really good stuff. I think that even though there's too much pervertedness going on, at least for like, because it's blatant and it's also not like, what's it called? Like, it's not something that you can kind of put off. Like, you can't just, like, ignore it because it's like straight up a plot point. So, I don't know. It's kind of weird. The humor is kind of old school. And it's not really my cup of tea, but it is still funny in some parts. I mean, I did laugh quite a bit reading this. But it's like the way Akira Toriyama just structured his story is kind of masterful because it's this kind of like heroic fantasy style story where there's just a bunch of little short stories that kind of have the same characters and there's a certain level of progression going on. But you could easily stop and not continue on, or you can come back and get more of it. So I really like that. I think it's really well done. In terms of characters, we just have Bulma, Goku, Roshi, Oolong, Yamcha, Chi-Chi, and Pilaf, of course, and his two little friends, the dog guy and the girl. And there really isn't too much to them. I mean, Bulma and Goku are really the only ones that get any development at all, and I think there really isn't much developed for them either. They're more or less the same character now as they were at the beginning of the story. So, it is what it is. In terms of world building, there's nothing actually explained, which is kind of interesting. I feel like Akira Toriyama doesn't really get into the world building stuff until much later when he introduces actual aliens. Whereas right now there's just sci-fi tech and there's talking animals and there's no reason for them. They just exist. And then, of course, there's Kai Chi attacks. And then there's, of course, crazy martial arts stuff like a Kamehameha wave, which is cool. I mean, I guess technically they did explain that, but I mean, in terms of world building, it's all visual. There really is no explanation for anything, and there really doesn't have to be because it's not important, right? I guess they explained the Dragon Balls, and so that's world building in that sense, but other than that, there really is nothing else. In terms of artwork, it's so odd because it's so good. It looks so nice and well done, but it's actually really, really simple. There's very minimal lines. The characters don't have a sketchy look to them. Everything is very simple and very well defined with very minimal line work. And I really like that. It's really well done. It looks really, really good. Of course, there's also kind of a simplisticness to it. Not every panel has a lot of background work, but panels that do look really good. So I don't know. Akira Toriyama is just a really good artist in that sense. It's kind of amazing, actually. And in terms of fan service, of course, like I said, there is kind of a bit. There's a few scenes where Bulma is naked, either because she's taking a bath or because she did something she didn't realize. And she wears a bunny outfit for half of the story, for like 12 chapters. But mostly the issue isn't necessarily the fan service. I think that's more or less pretty average. It's actually quite minimal compared to a lot of other series. But the pervy humor itself is a lot more. It's significantly like more direct than you would really want or expect in like a Western setting. I chalk this up to, you know, Japan having very different views on pervertedness and like what is funny humor and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's not really my cup of tea, but all of the humor that isn't necessarily pervy and some of it that actually is pervy but isn't really so direct is actually quite funny. Like overall, Akira Toriyama is a pretty good comedian. He's pretty good at writing comedy. It's just sometimes the jokes get a little too direct and they stop being jokes and it's more just like awkward, like old man fetish kind of shit. And, you know, it is what it is, but, you know, it is there, so be aware of that. If you're gonna get your kid to read this, maybe start them with Dragon Ball Z and then come back to Dragon Ball when they want to learn the history of Goku, or you can kind of just explain stuff to them as they're reading the story, because it might be difficult to palate if you're like a 10-year-old boy, right? So yeah, in terms of a rating, it's a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed it and I definitely want to read more. Now this is also kind of a nostalgic series for me, so even if it's not like perfect, it still gets a good score because I like it. But it wasn't really hitting as well as I thought, mostly because I was assaulted with that pervy humor at the very beginning, early on in the story, and I had forgotten that existed there. And so the story kind of affected me in that way, so it didn't get to stay as a 5 out of 5, but it is what it is, right? So there we go. So yeah, that's all I have to say about Dragon Ball. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please do like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you guys think about Dragon Ball, specifically this first part of Dragon Ball. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.